The Golden State Warriors as a franchise have been in a class of their own over the past decade, winning 4 championships in the span of 8 years, 6 finals appearances, and one of the best winning percentages in the NBA in that time span, including setting the record for most regular season wins that was previously set by the 90s Bulls that was thought to never be broken. This team has been the gold standard of basketball, and for good reason, because just when everyone had counted them out after Kevin Durant left the team to go play in Brooklyn and the injuries started piling on for the team, they came back and shocked the NBA world by winning another NBA title, even in a stacked Western Conference. And yet, despite all this success, despite being one of the greatest teams in NBA history, General Manager Bob Myers is still without a contract extension that is set to expire this season. Why, you might ask? Well, it's for a few reasons that on the surface you might think aren't a big deal, but could have a massive impact on the franchise's future, which has made owner Joe Lacob a little wary of handing over Bob Myers whatever contract extension he wants, and that's what we'll be talking about in this video. Also, a big shout out to Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring this video, but more on that in a little bit. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a video. This is still a brand new channel, and it would mean a great deal to me to help this community grow, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this all season long. Now, to be clear, when we say the Warriors shocked the NBA world by winning the NBA championship last season, really we shouldn't be all that surprised, because the Warriors still have one of the greatest players of all time, the greatest shooter of all time, and a team that is perfectly built around him to suit his style of play, along with a Hall of Fame coach. You should always consider the Warriors to be contenders as long as they still have prime Steph Curry on their hands. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the current Warriors regime in the front office did not draft Steph Curry in 2009, nor did they draft Klay Thompson in 2011. You see, Bob Myers was brought in as an assistant GM at the end of the 2011 season and was then promoted a year later as the team's general manager in 2012. His first move as a GM, drafting the likes of Harrison Barnes 7th overall and then Draymond Green in the 2nd round, which eventually became one of the biggest draft steals of the last decade. He then made the decision to fire Mark Jackson and hire Steve Kerr, as well as making other free agency acquisitions like bringing in David Lee, and ultimately leading the Warriors to winning their first championship with Steph, Klay, and Draymond all breaking out and coming into their own just at the right time in that season. And while Bob Myers had made a host of great moves that other GMs would only dream of over the course of his tenure, there have been a lot of questionable decisions that ultimately could leave the franchise scrambling, becoming irrelevant once Steph Curry retires and starts declining. And a lot of it has to do with the moves that were made this past offseason. But before I get into that, if you like making predictions on how certain teams and players are going to do for the second half of this season, well, then you're going to want to hear about this offer from today's sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Now listen, I've had fantasy sports companies reach out to me in the past to promote their product, but honestly, this one, by far and away, has been the most seamless and user-friendly app, especially when it comes to their pick'ems, which is how I made some money on Nikola Vucevic getting the over on his points and rebound totals the other night against the Sixers. Underdog Fantasy has higher or lowers in most player stats. Just pick higher on whether you think Zach or DeMar, as an example, are going to score more than 23 points, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night if you do 5 pick'ems and get them all right. As you guys know, I'm a Bulls fan, so that's why I'm going to use those guys as a reference. And guys, they're offering viewers of this channel as an exclusive offer. If you use the code AND1HOOPS, you'll get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Who doesn't want free money, right? You can also follow along with my picks once you sign up, and we can have some friendly competition. I'll leave a link to the site and the code in the description if you're interested. And let me know what picks you guys come up with. But anyway, with that being said, let's get back into the content. Now, as good as the Warriors' big three were in that title run, and the extreme importance also of their complementary role players, who really are stars in their own right, like Andrew Wiggins and Jordan Poole, that being said, not enough can be said about how critical guys like Gary Payton and Otto Porter were for that Warriors team. Both players the Warriors let walk in free agency because they knew they weren't going to be able to pay them with all that committed money they had going to their best players. And while Gary Payton's contract he was given by the Blazers certainly wasn't overpay, especially now that he's been injured, sometimes that's the price that you pay for a player that was key in helping a team win a championship. Consider this for a moment. Gary Payton had the highest defensive rating on the Warriors last season, even higher than Draymond Green, while Otto Porter finished 3rd on the team in defensive rating. You want to talk about box plus minus? Payton was 2nd on the Warriors last season, only behind Steph Curry, ahead of guys like Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, Jordan Poole. Now you would say, well, that's because he's not getting the kind of minutes these other guys that you just mentioned are. And while that's true, take win shares per 48 minutes, box plus minus per 36 minutes, hell, even defensive rating on a per 36 minute basis, and guess what? Gary Payton led the Warriors in all of those advanced metrics. Payton also was second on the roster in value over replacement player, only behind Steph Curry yet again, and Otto Porter also finished fourth on the team in value over replacement player, as well as box plus minus and win shares per 48, ahead of guys again like Jordan Poole, Andrew Wiggins, and Klay Thompson. Now, numbers aren't everything. Sometimes you have to use the eye test and simply see who's producing more on the court, who has more potential to become better or even break out into a star relative to their age and their prime. And while Gary Payton and Otto Porter were older, both in their late 20s, Bob Myers chose to prioritize Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins this offseason, signing both players to massive contract extensions to the tune of $140 million and $109 million respectively, both on 4-year deals, which I'm not saying those contracts weren't justified. I'm actually okay with the Wiggins contract given how important he was to that title team. But while Jordan Poole is a young and up-and-coming player, you did not need to pay him that kind of deal. I get that they wanted to get Poole signed and committed rather than letting him become a restricted free agent this upcoming offseason, but you didn't need to do it right now when you could have treated this as a prove-it year for Poole and then let the market dictate his worth by letting other teams make him offers and then matching whatever offer sheet he gets if you really want to keep him. And so far, that contract is already looking like a mistake. Poole is still a great player, don't get me wrong, and he has these flashes where he looks like a star, but then follows it up with very disappointing games that have cost the Warriors some wins. And while Poole's scoring numbers overall have gone up, especially with Curry being out of the lineup, his overall efficiency has dipped dramatically, putting up his worst shooting numbers since his rookie season, both from the field and from three. 30% from three on over 8 attempts per game is horrible. He's turning the ball over at a much higher rate. His defense has even declined further when it really wasn't that great to begin with, and he's boasting the worst box plus minus of his career, including also win shares. Like, as good as Bob Myers has been as a GM, giving a guy like Jordan Poole an all-star level contract to be a franchise cornerstone for a guy to come off the bench and doesn't provide any defensive impact and just be a high volume scorer isn't going to sit well with ownership. The other piece is, while yes, the Warriors essentially had to give Klay Thompson that contract they did back in the summer of 2019 to reward him for everything that he's done for that organization, giving Klay that extension coming off a major injury, which he then suffered another injury and has yet to look like the same Klay and will remain under contract through next season for $43.2 million, is still a hard pill to swallow. And don't get me wrong, Steph Curry is worth every penny of the contract they gave him when you think about the return on investment he has provided to that team over the course of his career. But the last year or two of his deal, when he's going to be 36 and 37 years old, making $55 million and $59 million in those seasons, could come back to bite them. But look, it's not just what Myers has done as it relates to this past offseason, not having enough cap space to build quality depth around their core, which they had last season. It's also because Myers really hasn't drafted that well. I'm not saying he's been terrible at drafting, because he did draft Draymond Green in the second round, but somehow it's been lost in the mix by some fans that Myers built this team through the draft as if he was the one that drafted Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. No, that was done by the previous regime. And when it comes to drafting in the lottery more recently, Myers has been especially bad, like when he drafted James Wiseman over LaMelo Ball and Tyrese Halliburton, among others, and Wiseman has either been injured or barely playable in the NBA. I do think Wiseman still has some potential because he's only 21 years old. He was the #1 recruit coming out of high school in 2019 for a reason. Dude is a skilled player, and I get it. They were given the #2 pick. Edwards was already taken, and they already had Steph, so the fit with LaMelo Ball would have been questionable. But seeing Wiseman now, who can barely make it into the rotation, hasn't even been playing that well in the G League when he's assigned there, has bust written all over him. So much so to the point where his trade value is incredibly low. Then, in the following draft, they had 2 lottery picks at number 7, number 14. Everyone thought Myers was going to ship out those picks to get a more win-now piece to maximize their big three's prime, but nope. He keeps the picks and drafts Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, drafting Kuminga right before Franz Wagner and Davion Mitchell, 2 potential stars in the league based on what we're seeing now, and Moody before Sengun and Trey Mann. Kuminga and Moody are fine players, but they've been both net negatives for the Dubs when they're on the court and aren't really the best decision makers when they're also on the court. That's the reason Steve Kerr doesn't give them a ton of playing time, even though they could really use them as depth pieces, especially Kuminga, who gives them some size when they're such a small team. Bob Myers, he brought in one of the greatest players to ever play the game in Kevin Durant. Look, KD made a soft-ass move and wanted to come play with the best team in the league so he could win rings because he kept getting worked by said team in Oklahoma City. It's not like that took a ton of convincing and maneuvering to get it done. And let's also not forget that he lost Kevin Durant even though KD had every reason to stay and would have been easy to convince him to remain with the club and keep winning championships, but no, Kevin Durant wanted to go somewhere where he could be the man and not deal with Draymond shenanigans yelling at him all the time. And look, the point is, it's easy to bring in quality free agents when you have one of the best teams in the league and players are willing to take pay cuts to come play for your organization for a chance to win a title. The real challenge and the sign of a good GM is what you do after the glory days are over. Jerry Krause learned the hard way after he dismantled the Bulls dynasty. What is the direction of the Warriors going forward as Steph and Klay start winding down their careers? Is it building around Jordan Poole? Is it building around Andrew Wiggins? Is the hope to just build through the draft yet again because that has been working for them? Or relying on bringing in big name free agents because it's the Warriors who have a winning culture established? Those are really the biggest question marks as it relates to Bob Myers' future and whether or not he'll in fact get a contract extension to remain the GM of the Warriors. And by the way, for the record, I'm almost certain Bob Myers will be extended because there will be those who will come back in the comments talking about this video and how it didn't age well. Yes, he's likely going to be extended. Okay, I get that, but it's also not out of the realm of possibility that he doesn't based on everything that was just discussed. But either way, I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.